Well, good morning, everyone. It's a little after 9, and I would like to go ahead and kick off the last day of the Mid-Atlantic Council August 2022 meeting. Before I do, I just want to recognize Peter Hughes and Atlantic Capes for the fantastic food at the reception last night in honor of Kate Wilkie and her term on the council. Thank you, Peter, for that. I think everyone had a really nice time, not only in the venue where we were, but the food was fantastic as well. So thanks for that. Go ahead, Peter.
So thank you for that. It was a privilege to be able to provide that last evening. It was fun, interesting, different food, and a most awesome venue with great people. So I'm appreciative of that. And I think Sarah and I are wearing the same color today. But that being said, why aren't we staying there, Chris? And we could slide a big bed right in that room, and that can be, that's where we should be. But yes, it was. We were happy to do that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. I actually, and most of you know this, I grew up 15 minutes from here, and I can see the tallest buildings here in Philadelphia from my backyard, where I grew up, but I had never had that vantage point in Philly before, so it was kind of neat to be able to, almost a 360-degree vantage point around the city. I was taken back. It was a really nice venue, and I guess I'll have to talk to Chris about, seeing whether or not we can stay there sometime down the road. So anyway, with that all said, thanks again for everyone's contribution to making last night a very fun evening and event. So we have a number of things on our agenda this morning. The first is the swearing in of new and reappointed council members. We have 3 reappointed council members and 1 new member. And I'm going to turn the mic over to Sarah Bland with the regional office to conduct the swearing in ceremony. Sarah?
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can everybody hear me okay? Mike is sorry he can't be here this week and today to welcome in our newly appointed and our reappointed council members. Although I'm excited to be here in person for the first time after 2.5 years to help shepherd in all of our new council members. Before we begin, I wanted to just walk through process-wise how we'll handle the swearing in this morning. Many of you probably remember when we were all in person, we used to have new members or appointed members recite the oath of office together. We have a hybrid mix today. Some people are here in person, and Scott Lennox from Maryland is participating virtually. So instead of reciting the oath of office, I will ask a series of questions of the newly appointed council members and reappointed council members, and then I will call on each of you individually to say, I do. And the regional administrator warned me not to inadvertently marry anybody today. So I will call on all of you after each question for you all to respond. And so our new members, we have Wes Townsend is a reappointed member from Delaware, reappointed member from New Jersey, Peter Hughes, our newly appointed council member, Ken Neal from Virginia, and then participating virtually, a reappointed member from Maryland, Scott Lennox. And Scott, maybe before I begin, can we just make sure you're unmuted and everything is working okay?
Yeah, can you hear me okay, Sarah?
Yes, great. Okay. Do you, as a duly appointed member of a regional fishery management council established under the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act, hereby promise to conserve and manage the living marine resources of the United States of America by carrying out the business of the council for the greatest overall benefit of the nation? Wes?
I do.
Ken?
I do.
Peter?
Yes.
And Scott?
I do.
Do you recognize your responsibility to serve as a knowledgeable and experienced trustee of the nation's fisheries resources, being careful to balance competing private or regional interests and always aware and protective of the public interest in those resources? Wes?
I do.
Ken?
I do.
Peter?
Yes, I do.
Scott?
I do.
Do you commit yourself to uphold the provisions, standards, and requirements of the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act and other applicable law? And shall you conduct yourself at all times according to the rules of conduct prescribed by the Secretary of Commerce? Wes?
I do.
Ken?
I do.
Peter?
Absolutely, I do.
Scott?
I do.
Is this oath given freely and without mental reservation or purpose of evasion? Wes?
Yes.
Ken?
Yes.
Peter?
Yes.
Scott?
Yes, it is.
Awesome. Well, congratulations to all of our new and reappointed council members. And now I will give you your wonderful certificate from the Secretary of Commerce. And Scott, we will mail your certificate to you.
Thanks very much.
So I think it's worth a round of applause for our new and reappointed members. Thank you. I find it interesting how Peter made sure not to say "I do." And I was watching, because there are no aprons on the tables, I could make sure Sonny wasn't holding his hand or something like that. I don't need any more drama than what I already have in my life at this point. So it's, well, congratulations to everyone. Thank you, Sarah, for conducting that through the virtual and in-person format. So moving on to the next item of business, each and every year, the council goes through the process of elections for chair and vice chair. And we do this every year at the same time as we reappoint and welcome in new members to the council. So this is the time for when vice chair and chair, the election of officers will be held. And John Almeida, with the general counsel, will serve in that role. And we have Joe Cimino, who was our nominations committee chair. So I'm going to turn the mic over to John, and we'll take it one step at a time. Go ahead, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, great. We're going to now conduct elections for the positions of chair and vice chair of the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council in accordance with the procedures described in the council's statement of organization, practices, and procedures. To start, I'd ask Mr. Cimino, the chair of the nominating committee, for the nominations he's received for the positions of chair and vice chair.
Thanks, John. I had two nominations for chair. Both nominations were for Mike Louisi, and for vice chair, Wes Townsend.
Thanks, Joe. We'll first turn to the chair position, but at this point, I'll call for any additional nominations from voting members of the council for the position of council chair. Are there any additional nominations for the position of chair? Please use the raised hand function to indicate that you'd like to nominate someone. Okay, seeing no hands, I now declare nominations for the position of council chair to be closed. Where there's only one nominated candidate, by operation of the council rules on elections, Mr. Louisi, as the sole candidate accepting the nomination for chair, is hereby elected by acclaim. Congratulations, Mike.
Thank you, John.
At this point, we'll turn to the position of vice chair. In addition to the nomination for Wes Townsend, do any voting council members wish to present any additional nominations for the position of vice chair? Again, use the raise hand function to indicate if you have another nomination. Seeing no raised hands, we have only one nominated candidate, and by operation of the council rules on elections, Mr. Townsend, as the sole candidate accepting nomination for vice chair, is hereby elected by acclaim. Congratulations, Wes.
Thank you, John.
Okay, so that's the election for this year. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, John. And before we start, I'll just want to say thank you to the council for your continued vote of confidence in having me serve the council as chair. I'm finally, the last couple of years have been challenging for everyone, but I'm starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel as far as getting back together and being able to operate in a way that I think is going to be very productive in tackling some of the major challenges that we have ahead of us. And, I just want to say again, thank you for your vote of confidence for my continued service to the council as council chair. And I'll turn over to Wes if Wes has anything to say to the council. Wes.
Thank you, everyone, for giving me the opportunity to be your vice chair again. It'll be great to have a full year that we get to see everybody every other month. So I'm looking forward to that, and thank you again.
Okay, thanks, Wes. And I'll look forward to working with you in a continued way throughout this course of this next council calendar year. That said, we have a business session this morning, which includes a number of reports as well as organizational reports from the federal participants. And so what I'd like to do, as we typically do, it's a little after 9, we're going to step through the 3 reports that we have, the SSC report, the NTAP report, and then Chris Moore's Executive Director's report. Probably take a short break if you haven't had a chance to check out yet at that time, and we'll come back and take up organization reports prior to adjourning the meeting after liaison reports as well. So with that, Dr. Rago.
Okay.
You can hear us. I'm going to turn things over to you for your SSC report.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Congratulations on your new chairmanship there. Appreciate working with you. Next slide, please. This material is under tab 15. We addressed 9 overall topics at our meeting in July, and I'll only be going over 3 of them here. The other ones were covered in the specifications yesterday and the day before. So those are the surf clam genetics, the harvest control rule update, and then the Northeast Regional Climate Action Plan. So next slide, please. In 2019, the council began support for a study to investigate genetic differences between surf clam subspecies of Spicula solidissima and SS similis, which is in the management area from Mid-Atlantic to Georges Bank. Matt Hare was the principal investigator on this study from Cornell University. And there are a lot of advances in genetic methods since the last studies of these 2 subspecies were analyzed, and so they are much more powerful. As kind of a bottom line, the phenotypic differences that are associated with the genotypic variations have yet to be determined, but they could have important results for future management. And we'll talk about haplotypes, which is another theme on variation on the genetic differences overall. And so, we'll also be discussing what these findings may have in terms of assessments, surveys, management, and what further research may be necessary in order to support these differences. So next slide, please. Our first term of reference was to sort of evaluate the findings. Overall, it was an excellent report. It's state of the art. It was well presented, very lucid, and exceptionally detailed. Latitudinal differences differences between the samples between Georgia and Massachusetts are important and actually are known before using less sophisticated earlier methods of genetic analysis. But they also found important differences between the inshore and offshore populations. And these are called operational taxonomic units, and so OTUs. And so there were two OTUs for solidissima. These are haplotypes, so to speak, and their proportions varied by sample site. So they're within the subspecies known as solidissima. There are also differences. But at the kind of a big theme throughout all of this too is that measures of genetic diversity appear to be similar for all the OTUs, meaning that they don't seem to be under any particular selective pressure. So harvesting or some other factor could be influencing their genetic diversity, but that does not appear to be occurring. So next slide, please. The SSC was asked to identify the implications of these findings. We really don't know whether there are differences in recruitment, growth, maturation, or other life history traits. Initial findings and more on say growth rates really need to factor in differences that occur naturally are known to occur with respect to depth and productivity. So that is a kind of on the to-do list for future work. Another factor that needs to be considered is that the inshore sampling or inshore strata may be sort of oversampled in the sense that there's a greater proportion of sampling in those areas relative to the overall abundance of and spatial distribution of the stock. So that will require working with the assessment leads and teams to see how do we scale these survey numbers to the total population. So that work is to be done. As far as where this will go in terms of future work, it will have implications for the sampling regimes and the surveys. If we are to attempt to estimate biomass and fishing mortality rates separately, it will require not only changes in the model, but also changes in monitoring data. And I'll get to those in a minute. And then ultimately, if some kind of spatial management is sort of desirable from a biological standpoint, it has to be considered in terms of its implementation feasibility by the council and management as a whole. So next slide, please. In terms of research needs, we felt that it was important to continue the analysis of all the factors, especially aging growth, and to see how oceanographic processes, especially advective transport, that is currents transporting offspring from one area to another, it would be important to do. It does not appear, but there's no clear understanding as whether historical exploitation has been sufficient to reduce genetic variation. Right now, the data do not suggest that there's any differences among species or haplotypes. Next slide, please. We recommend continued monitoring of the distribution of the species, and particularly if the notion is that the climatic factors are responsible. We encouraged,
Paul, you're fading out.
Okay, sorry.
We can barely hear you. If you can get a little closer to your mic.
Okay. Yeah. Let's see what that see what I can do on that. Yeah, a little better.
That's better.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we recommended, joint sampling with the industry center survey, and and also acquiring samples for future analysis is a good idea, because the samples do keep over time. They do have some shelf life. There may be a need to increase sampling, particularly in inshore areas, and some way consistent with the spatial resolution of future harvesting. But at the end of the day, the questions of stock structure will be resolved by considering what differences are important and whether future sampling programs can provide an adequate basis for more refined management. And this is kind of one of the lessons learned from the analysis of cod in the Northeast. Next slide, please. We did receive an update from Julia on the harvest control rule. The SSC again expressed some concerns about interactions between the recreational and commercial fisheries, and similar to the way many of these things are addressed within the summer flounder MSC, which we heard a great presentation on the other day. We also encourage some differences between the for-hire vessels and private boat and shore-based anglers, noting that their behaviors are distinctly different, and again reiterated an item that we had in our report to the council, that management uncertainty may increase as a result of the HCR interventions, but that is to be determined. We don't know anything about that yet. And then SSC members expressed some interest in continuing to work with the HCR when an FMAT is formed in 2023. So I'd like to continue to be involved in some way. So our last topic that we talked, next slide, please. These were just placeholder here. We in terms of those things that were covered earlier. So the Regional Climate Action Plan was presented by Vince Saba from the NEFSC, and this is the Northeast Regional Action Plan. This is version 1, and of course the basis for this plan is well known. That the Northeast region is warming faster than elsewhere in the world. Behavior of the Gulf Stream continues to change. Heat waves are becoming more important, more common. pH has declined, and species are moving. The accomplishments to date, they've made some major progress in terms of species, habitat, and social vulnerability analyses. There's formal approaches being used for scenario planning, which we heard about yesterday. Laboratory studies are being done to inform some of these process-oriented models, and there's been some progress in terms of including environmental factors in stock assessments. They did mention some exciting work in terms of improved physical oceanography models. These have higher resolution and might ultimately help provide some linkages for resource utilization. But one of the key things is that and a need is for the near-term prediction skill. So what would be interesting and desirable, for example, is say what is the predicted number of warm core rings impinging the shelf in 2023. That might be something useful for the say ILEX modeling and so forth, management. Next slide, please. The Northeast Regional Climate Action Plan has 10 major objectives or goals, and most of them many of them are continuation of existing sampling and modeling efforts. So the SSC, kind of focused on on number 6, 7, and 10. So 6 is to work with the partners to improve regional hindcasts and projections. 7 is to improve the spatial management of living marine resources. We have some comments on that. And then 10 is to develop stock assessment models, which includes some environmental terms, and considerable progress is being made on that. So there's some suggestions on those features. Next slide, please. The SSC did have some concerns. One was we really need to make sure we don't lose focus on the historical observations, particularly as more recent trends dominate discussions and research foci. So it was just kind of a cautionary concern here. They emphasized the need for high resolution temporal data. For example, phenology differences, seasonal differences across years, and trying to exploit the information from the fixed buoys and also collaborations with wind energy installations. So these higher resolution models can help fill in some of the gaps, and it's important that all of the fishery dependent platforms, i.e. fishing vessels, should be used to maximum extent possible. We acknowledge the importance of the spatial modeling efforts. New assessment models incorporate not only high resolution environmental data, but also spatial and temporal harvesting patterns, and that will be essential. And one of the suggestions was to combine some of the features that are used for estimation, this model known as VAST, which is a autoregressive spatial and temporal model, with WAM, the Woods Hole Assessment model, which is a state space model. There were some concerns expressed about poorly resolved spatial harvest data. If we're going to go down that path, there's a good need to have some fine scale work on that. So study fleets are an important step. The VMS, or vessel monitoring system data, could complement that work and examine a broader swath of fishing behaviors, and allow for greater extrapolation of those observations. Next slide, please. Again, continuing on the theme of some concerns, the need for short-term forecast of ecosystem conditions is really a key need in terms of using data in forecasting and catch recommendations. So we had some questions about the ecosystem model Atlantis, and that Vince gave us a good update on how some of these higher resolution physical models, oceanographic models, are playing an important role in there. Members of the public asked about the linearity of environmental drivers and likelihood of interactions with other factors. So it was noted that not all the drivers will change at the same rate. So it's really important that we continue modeling efforts for both environmental processes and the biological responses to those. So, and one way of doing that would be to consider, a range of species, going from our shortest lived species, the squid, to our longest lived species, the ocean quahog. Next slide, please. So the recommendations from the SSC include, improving linkages with existing monitoring stations. Take a look at the design efficiency of existing sampling programs. There's kind of an inexorable decline in relative funding for these kinds of programs, particularly base programs. So work towards improving the efficiency of allocation, the deployment of samplings is important. Again, the recommendation to increase temporal resolution is required, and increase the focus on spatial modeling of that, and underlying it, the data necessary to support those activities. The ability to this will in turn lead to improved short-term forecasts of environmental data and uncertainty and estimates for stock assessments. So if we have a better idea about what's likely to occur in terms of environmental factors, then ultimately we might be able to reduce the CV of the overfishing limit, and therefore change the recommendations for ABCs. So again, this consider the range of species, and particularly the short-term forecast, where we do have the oceanographic work to date has identified some important linkages. And then overall, the SSC was impressed with the progress made under the first version of the regional action plan, and look forward to continued accomplishments of this. Now, if I had been an oceanographer, I would have layered this thing with multiple graphics and everything. So I apologize for simply bullet points, but I think it does convey that there's incredible opportunities, and we're looking forward to working with the ecosystem scientists on that. Next slide, please. We did have a discussion and noted that the National SSC meeting is next week. We have Sarah Geitchis giving a keynote, and then Olaf Jensen, Jan Jal, Alexei Sheroff, and Brandon Muffley will be representing the SSC at this. They also are required to bring back the cooler of either fresh halibut or salmon for the remainder of those who did not go. We are looking forward, and we'll be continuing our discussions on potential topics with the council in October, and our next meeting is September 13th and 14th. So thank you very much, and appreciate the time, and any questions I'm happy to try to answer.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Appreciate your report. I'll look to members of the council if anybody has any questions at this time for you. Michelle Duvall, and then Peter Hughes. Go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dr. Rago, for the report. And I guess I just wanted to come back to the surf clam genetics report that you all received. And so I guess, what I'm taking away from the SSC's recommendations at this point is that, although the researchers recommended, separate management of these different taxonomic units of Solidissima, that there's going to be additional work would be needed before there might be any recommendations from the SSC to move in that direction. Is that relatively accurate?
Yes, there's no questioning of the genetic basis of the findings. They're clear, and what is not as clear is how could this be achieved, and secondly, would it make a difference? So if there were differential harvesting patterns by area that turned out to be important with respect to these taxonomic units, that might be something to further consider in management. But the data needed to support a recommendation of that sort are not there yet, nor is the modeling efforts to date, specifically oriented to that objective. Thank you.
And just a quick follow-up, and maybe I'll look, I see Jessica is in the room. Remind me when the next surf clam assessment is and how this information might be incorporated or considered during that process?
I am not sure on that. It might be 26, maybe. But I would perhaps Brandon or someone else may have it at the tip of their tongue. Yeah. The cycle for both surf clams and quahogs is longer. I know it was originally like 6 years, so that may be in the ballpark.
Yeah, Paul, thanks. Jessica's here with us. I'm going to turn to Jessica to provide any thoughts.
So I believe the next assessment for surf clams was originally scheduled for 2024 or 2026, but that was prior to COVID, where we've lost 2 years of survey sampling. So either way, we're a number of years out on the stock assessment schedule from our next assessment. But I have had some discussions with Dr. Hennon at the Science Center, as well as Matt Hare, the researcher that had worked on this. And so there's a number of next steps that we think need to happen. As Paul said, the genetics on this seems to be settled, that we have 2 operational units for Spischula. And then we have this other southern surf clam that goes all the way up into Massachusetts, which is Similis. So we've essentially got these 3 genetic stocks operating within our region. So first, I think in talking with Brandon, we want to get these folded into our research priorities as soon as possible to make sure those are explicitly spelled out there. Also, we're looking at opportunities to get some of the work to answer these management questions for the management, the stock assessment, the survey answered as soon as possible. We did have leftover sample kits for the genetic sampling kits because we were unable to take as many samples as we wanted from the federal survey. So those have already been sent up to the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, and they're planning to take samples now that they're doing the southern area for surf clam this year in August. They're planning to take those genetic samples and also take shells for aging associated with all of those. So they'll have all of those obtained. They last for a number of years. The shells can be processed whenever they need to be processed for aging and growth. The Science Center already had finished up in June sampling a small subsample of the Spischula. I think it was 40 or 50 shells that they processed, and there are some really interesting things in there. I think Eric Robillard from the center in his email to us had asked whether we were feeding them in aquariums because they grow. It looked like the growth was very different and difficult to age. So sorting out some of those inshore offshore differences, I think is going to be really important with those units. Also looking for, I see Joe stepped out, but prior to COVID, we had talked to the state of New Jersey about trying to get some of the inshore samples from their survey as well to fill the gap. They did not go out during COVID, so that may be an area that we'll look into. But looking to get those samples and then opportunities to get them the funding, and the support to get those samples processed to help answer those questions, I think is going to be important. And then lastly, I think we need to do a little bit of outreach with our state partners. I did reach out to some of them prior to the SSC meeting, receiving this report, and I saw some of the shellfish people from state of Massachusetts and North Carolina had connected and listened in. So they're aware of some of these issues because there are obviously some implications to the state management as well. If a state's managing its fishery, thinking all of the federal waters resources part of their reproductive stock, that may not be the case. So trying to make sure that all our partners are aware of that and working on this. So again, we're gonna, I think, keep working towards getting those things addressed to the extent that we can. Does that answer your question, Michelle?
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. That's really helpful to hear all of that because, I think reading the report and hearing the SSC discussion about the this solid nature of the results that we do have these two different operational units. And then you think about trying to parse that into management, it makes your head spin a little bit, so I think the SSC's conclusion and statement that, whether or not there's utility in doing so is really something to keep in mind as we move forward. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Jessica. I do have Brandon Muffley with his hand up. Maybe I'll turn to Brandon before Peter, if you can hold on a second. Brandon?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. My comments weren't specific to the surf clam discussion, but I just did want to follow up on 2 points that Paul had raised during his presentation. One in regards to the SSC's comments on the Northeast Climate Strategy Action Plan. So council staff have also reviewed the draft plan, and so we're going to put together our comments, staff comments, and the SSC's comments and put that in a letter to go to the Science Center so they actually sort of get a formal input from the council regarding our comments on the action plan. So I just wanted to make sure you all were aware that the Science Center will get those comments. And then second, in regards to the joint council SSC meeting that we have planned in October, the SSC had some initial discussions at our July meeting in regards to topics, and we'll discuss it again in September when we meet. But I wanted to throw it out to council members. If you all have specific topics or areas of interest that you would like us to discuss during this joint meeting, please, either bring them up now or shoot me an email afterwards. We are pretty unique in the Mid-Atlantic that we have this joint SSC council meeting, and I don't think most other regions do that, and I think it's been really beneficial for us over the last few years to hold those joint meetings. But we just want to make sure we're covering topics that are of interest to both the SSC and the council. So if you all have any ideas on topics you'd like us to discuss, just bring them to me so that we can, put together any materials and start thinking about how we want to structure that discussion when we get together in October.
All right, thanks for that, Brandon. We'll give that some thought. Peter, come to you next.
Great, thanks. I was going to speak a little bit to the SSC's recommendation for additional sampling for surf clams, but Jessica's totally on top of that, so I don't need to speak to that. I would request a nice 6-pound center cut skin on fillet of king salmon, preferably from either you or Brandon at the next meeting. So thank you.
Thanks, Peter. John Maniscalco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Paul. I'm encouraged to hear that the SSCs continue to be, or they are interested in continuing to engage on the harvest control rule. And this isn't really a question for Paul, but I was wondering if council staff had any update on kind of like timeline and steps related to continuing the work on the harvest control rule. Thank you.
All right, thanks, John. Chris just informed me that he'll cover that in his report. And I'll get back to Peter's request. So hopefully the folks that are going out to Alaska are better fishermen than Chris and I, because we would be very hungry if we lived in Alaska. It didn't go as well. So if you really want that that center cut fillet, you probably ought to order it yourself and have it shipped. Anyone else from the council? Any questions for Paul? Is there anyone from the audience that's here that has any questions for Paul? Seeing none, I'll go to the webinar. James Fletcher, you have your hand up. Go ahead, James.
Dr. Rego, is there any line of demarcation below which the northern surf clam does not live? In other words, we have what I think is a southern surf clam off of North Carolina. But where is there a clear line of demarcation, temperature, or whatever, below which the surf clam does not live?
Yeah, that's a very good question, James. I don't know the exact depths. I know that they have been changing over time. This has been a subject of various research papers in the literature. They are some concerns about their temperature dependency and slower growth in excessive temperatures. Also, that they have been moving into deeper waters. This, of course, is the basis for some of the concerns in terms of mixed surf clam and ocean quahog cages or catches, and which are currently requiring some sorting on deck to achieve. The exact values I could check with Dan Hennon at the center and find out what they are. It is interesting, the Similis, that is the southern surf clam, is found a little more broadly than the boundary at North Carolina. So again, there are some additional details in the report by Matt Hare that could be useful in terms of the spatial distribution. The environmental distribution is a little more complex, and I'd have to verify that with Dan. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Paul. All right, seeing no other hands at this time for questions, Paul, I appreciate your report, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon, hopefully.
Yep. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on next to our NTAP, which is the Northeast Trawl Advisory Panel report. Wes Towson is our representative from the council that serves on the NTAP, and he informed me that Hannah Hart with council staff will be providing us a presentation on the July 13th NTAP meeting. So Hannah, if you're there, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay, so I don't have a presentation or anything, just some quick updates. Like was mentioned, July 13th, we had a meeting and there's a full summary available in the briefing book. Just to highlight some of the main topics of conversation. So the center provided an update on the spring survey, some recent studies and data management. And they also let us know that Alex Dunn is a new Northeast Fisheries Science Center NTAP participant, and he'll be working mainly with stock assessments and communication on assessments with NTAP. There's also a subgroup working on an NTAP orientation document. And this document is really to serve as a reference that compiles, the purpose, organization, background, history, and then past and current projects and any results available associated with those projects. We're hoping to meet in the fall to review that orientation document and then hopefully finalize it in early 2023 and share it with the councils. There was also an update on the restrictor rope research. They had a successful sampling conducted this spring, and the second leg will start up this fall, likely in mid-September. There are plans to have a working group meeting early September, so prior to that fall sampling, to discuss the sampling design and any preliminary results that might be available. We also discussed future priorities of NTAP. So prior to the meeting, a survey was sent out to get individuals' thoughts on the priorities or what NTAP priorities should be, and those results were presented at the meeting. And so following up on that, we plan to have a hybrid meeting early in 2023 to continue that discussion and to discuss any potential research priorities. And then lastly, we're working on confirming NTAP membership for the upcoming year. So far, we know that we'll need to fill that New England co-chair seat since Mike Sissenwine will no longer have a seat on the New England Council. But other than that, we'll work through the appropriate channels to get those seats filled. Rather quick update, but that concludes the NTAP update. And if there are any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Hannah. Let me turn to the council to see if anyone has any questions regarding the NTAP work that's being done at this time. Peter Hughes.
I don't have a question. Thank you. I couldn't find my raised hand. I don't have a question about that, but I want to make sure that that committee is well populated. And so please, when there are openings, please, announce them so that we can put fishermen on there with, boots on the ground experience. Because the NTAP, I can't express, how important it is, that committee. So if there are openings, we need to hear about them. So thank you.
Yeah, and so Peter, to that point, it's often difficult to find people that want to engage, that are knowledgeable enough to, serve on that panel and serve on it effectively. So when the time comes and we are seeking some volunteers for that work, we're always open for finding the right candidates for that. So just please let me know, or let Peter or Wes know. Wes is our primary representative on that committee right now from the council. So anything else? Any other questions for Hannah or comments? Switch gears again. Hold on one second. Anyone? I see Paul Rago with his hand up. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to emphasize for the council as a whole that the work of NTAP is incredibly important, that the establishing scale in stock assessments is crucial for reliable assessments. And the comparative experiments that have been done are finding their way into the stock assessments. And they are, in fact, it was kind of some of the central features of stabilizing models, making sure that they do give realistic results. So just encourage further work on this aspect. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Paul. I don't see any other hands, so thanks, Hannah, for that report. And we're going to go ahead and move on to our Executive Director's report, Dr. Chris Moore. Chris, I know that it sometimes makes more sense to stop along the way instead of going through. So what I'd ask, if you have your webinar, are you able to call on people in between? That might be easier than having me go back and forth. So I'm going to turn things over to Chris and have him work through his report. Go ahead, Chris.
Mr. Chair, there's a number of items behind, well, several items behind the tab that I want to talk about with the council this morning. There's also a few other items that aren't behind the tab that I'd like to talk with the council about this morning. First one, like always, is the 2022 plan meeting topics. And take a look at that if you haven't. We have a meeting scheduled for October 4th through 6th in a place we haven't been to, as far as I know, Dewey Beach. And there's a new hotel in Dewey that can accommodate us. Looking forward to that meeting. That meeting will start with an executive committee meeting on Tuesday afternoon. So plan on that starting at 1 o'clock, going through Thursday afternoon. Number of items on that list. The reason that the executive committee is meeting is to go over our 2023 implementation plan. So that's our typical process. We start in October, we complete that in December. So we'll have a good discussion about all the things that we plan for 2023. We'll also be talking about the Surf Climb and Ocean Quag separation requirements amendment. We'll be looking at how our private recreational tilefish permitting and reporting requirements are doing. As Paul and Brandon indicated, we're having a joint council SSC meeting. We will have our essential fish habitat redo amendment hopefully kicked off at that meeting. And I'm sure everyone's excited to hear that we'll be doing Robert's Rules of Training for at least a couple hours. So prepare yourself for that. And spiny dogfish and fishery monitoring and research division update as well. One of the things that's not on the list, and it's in my report, is the NOAA, a briefing on the NOAA saltwater recreational fisheries policy. So we'll have that there as well. One of the things that that'll happen after this meeting, now that we've had the elections, is that Shelley will send you an email probably early next week asking for your committee preferences. So that's an important thing that we do every year. You indicate your preferences. Mike West and I will sit down and look at your preferences, your choices, and then hopefully have those committee assignments out by the end of August. And we need to hustle because there's meetings, committee meetings that are happening in August. So we may have some interim assignments. We'll work through those, but we'll definitely get those done by the end of August. Looking at the other things behind the tab, before I get to those, the next item is the council meeting topics at a glance. You can look at that again. If you haven't had a chance to look at that. Before I get to those, one of the other things that I wanted to talk about is our schedule related to the harvest control rule list of things that we talked about in June. So remember, we made a decision on the harvest control rule, and we talked about what's going to happen after June relative to recreational reform. So there's still a number of things on the list that we have sketched out. We basically have indicated in June that in fact we take care of those beginning in 2023. Mary, if you could put that table up for me, please. There's a table that I asked Julia to put together with other staff, basically detailing all things summer climate, scup-like sea bass and bluefish, as those tasks are associated with those species for the rest of the year. So if you look at this particular table and you go down it, you see that there's a lot there. So we have a busy, what is it, September, October, November, 4 months left. And we have here things like the Black Sea Bass State Allocation Amendment, which we hope gets out of Garfo purgatory soon so that we can get that out. We also have this HCR FW addenda, which is the Harvest Control Rule Framework. So after the decision in June, we need to put together a package that we submit to Garfo. Julia is working on that now. We hope to have that in the Garfo soon. Specs, we've started the process at this particular meeting. We'll continue it through the end of the year. It'll include the recreational spec meeting that we have in December with the board. So you can take a look at that list there and see all the things associated with that particular development or the development of those specs. So as you all know, we had the MSC presentation this week. We had the results of models presented to us. And one of the big things that we're going to be doing is incorporating those model results into our recreational specification process as we proceed through the year. So that's going to be interesting as we implement what we approved with the harvest control rule. So there's an intersection there that we talked about this week. That's going to be a challenge for us because we've never done that. We haven't implemented the harvest control rule yet. So we have to get some numbers on paper, present those to the monitoring committee and bring those forward into our December meeting. There's other things there, including, remember when we talked about rec reform, there's this technical guidance document that was referenced. It's been referenced a couple of times. So we'll begin that. We'll talk about in December, but most of the work related to that's going to occur in early 2023. Remember also that we have this sector separation and catch counting amendment, part of the recreational package. Again, most of that will occur beginning in 2023. There's been interest. John Maniscalco asked about the harvest control rule development and how that was going to proceed relative to, I'm sure, the other items that were contained within that particular package when the council looked at it in June. We will be forming an FMAT PDT in early 2023, putting together all the packaging, all the things that we have associated with any particular action, like public information documents that folks will be able to look at. So with that, I'll stop. There's a lot there. Mary, if you could leave this table up, if there's any questions about this or any of the other items that I referenced earlier, certainly I can ask or answer those now. I have a question from John Almeida. John?
Thanks, Chris. As far as the 2023 implementation plan development over the next couple of months, do you anticipate some discussion on not just the subject matter of the implementation plan, but how council meetings and committee meetings are going to be run going forward in terms of virtual, hybrid, in person, those kind of issues?
Yeah, that was going to be my next topic, but certainly we can talk about that now. If you, well, backing up. So we've talked about several times at this council meeting, at the council meetings, how we would proceed in the future relative to hybrid meetings, in-person meetings, virtual meetings. And as we indicated, you know, probably at the beginning of the year and halfway through the year, all the meetings for 2022 are going to be hybrid. However, we really do need to talk about what we plan for 2023. There are limitations to our hybrid meetings. I've seen them this week in terms of how things can or may not work as just technical limitations. Stephen works hard to make sure that you know, the sound is as perfect as he can get it, but there's just things that he can't control. And that causes us some concern. I noticed that there's been some council meetings at other councils where they have noticed them as in-person only meetings. We haven't done that yet, and we're not going to do that for the rest of 2022. But as we roll into 2023, at least from my perspective, I think we should encourage folks to attend our meetings in person, make the virtual part of it optional and as a backup for those folks that have, you know, some issues associated with in-person attendance, and use the virtual meetings when we need to get additional public participation. So I think that would be sort of a good way to think about it. I'm not sure that it would benefit us to say, you know, in 2023, all our meetings are going to be in person. Yeah, you know, you have to be there or tough luck. But again, it's something that you all need to decide and help us with. That's a long answer to your question.
Yeah, thanks for offering that, John. I know it's something that we've talked about at the leadership level about what to plan for next year. And, you know, I'll just offer my opinion at this time. So I looked at this situation where we're in right now, kind of in this hybrid model that we're using for meetings as a transition. And I do envision at some point in the future that transition will find an end, and that I hope that we find ourselves more in the in-person. Not that there aren't people that there are concerns and there are issues. I'm not downgrading any of that, but I personally, this is, you know, the virtual world is something that I personally have dealt with every single day since COVID started. So my day job is virtual for the most part. And people have asked me, you know, does it make a difference? Some people would say that being there virtually is no different from being there in person, and I disagree. And that's just my opinion. I think being somewhere in person, either as a presenter or as a member of a group, makes a much bigger difference than just being there virtually and essentially speaking to a group of people and all we hear is the voice. It just makes a difference to me. That's my opinion. So I would like to hear from some others about what you envision possibly for 2023. Granted, we don't have another, you know, we don't revert into a situation where the pandemic concerns and issues are elevated to another level for which there's concern. I mean, that certainly takes top priority. But, I think Chris and I and Wes certainly would like to get some feedback as to what your visions are for 2023 and moving on, beyond that, as to whether or not we ever do go fully back to an in-person meeting and have the ability to listen into our meetings, but only participate if you're here. I don't know that that is reality, for the future, given what we've learned from virtual meetings, but I would love the feedback, and I think this is the right time for it. So I'll open that door and see if anyone has any thoughts. Sarah?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a great conversation, and it's one I think we are all wrestling with, both here in the council arena as well as our normal day jobs. And I think we all see there are benefits of in-person. There are certainly benefits of virtual participation. And this is a conversation I think we started to have at a recent Northeast Region Coordinating Council meeting on collectively within our region, how we want to approach meetings moving forward. What benefits have we realized in the last couple of years with our hybrid and virtual participation, and how can we keep those benefits and still sort of get those benefits of in-person participation as well. I think when you're thinking about how to move forward, I would strongly encourage the council to also think about our diversity and inclusion goals, as well as our equity and environmental justice goals, because in some ways in the last couple of years, there are ways that we have increased participation and accessibility to people that may not have otherwise been able to participate or travel to council meetings. And there's a lot of benefit there. And so I would urge the council to continue to think about that. And whatever model you use, how can we continue to make these council meetings accessible to as many people as possible, and people that may not be able to travel or may not have the same connections and channels to the council that some of us do have.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Sarah. Thank you for that. Dewey?
I wanted to thank Chris for this task here of laying it out, because it helps me looking at the future of the different stuff we have coming up and a timeline for that happening. And for the virtual or in-person meeting aspect of it, Sarah had some good points brought up about the virtual stuff, but I kind of like the in-person commitment of meeting, if possible, in person to do business up until August of 2023, and then y'all can figure out how it happens after that. Thank you.
Thanks, Dewey. I appreciate that. Pat Gear?
Thank you, sir. I agree with a lot of what Sarah said. I think it's important that we have as much input as possible and as much participation, but, doing this for 2 years, I can't tell you how many times something came up and I wish I could have just looked in someone's face. You can look across the table and go, what do you think? And, Mike, you and I have done it. We have been on multiple text messages together on these things, but I think it's important that the council members are here. I firmly believe that, participation from the public, being able to do it virtually and provide their comments, because they all, folks can't get to these meetings. So, having the council members here, having as many as presenters here as well is important, but having that opportunity for the general public to, listen in, and then when we do have public comment, they can chime in and give their input.
Thanks, Pat. I've got a couple other hands. Let's get through those, and we'll certainly take comments regarding the table that's before us and the issue of meetings in 2023. Go next to Chris Batsavage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I had many of the same comments Pat did. I think kind of having all the council members here or all virtual makes more sense, especially with some of the tougher issues. I think being in person, talking in the hallways at breaks, there's a lot of benefit to that. But having that online option for the public to participate, I think is very important too. As Sarah mentioned, getting to these locations for the public is challenging. A lot of them take time off from work. One thought maybe in the future with I guess, we have meetings, some are more busy than others, and sometimes the year are harder to travel than others, would it be possible to have just like a full virtual meeting in February if the agenda didn't have any items that are, would be better to handle in person, to where we kind of overcome some of those challenges of travel? Because in February, somewhere along the East Coast, somebody's gonna get jammed up by some sort of winter weather event. But that's just kind of a thought maybe in the future as we still transition into whatever we may end up in 2023. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Chris. Michelle?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I also agree with the points raised by Pat and Chris and Sarah with respect to public participation in the meetings. I think, they're often expensive places to get to, expensive places to stay at. And so I think for, fishermen and other stakeholders to be able to participate, we need to be a little bit flexible about that. I agree that, my preference is to meet in person and to meet with my fellow council members in person. And I think for, presentations that are, substantive to the, some of the management issues that we're dealing with, that it's extremely helpful to have presenters here. But I also understand that, there's a cost effectiveness if you're just providing a quick update to be able to have your staff member do that online and not incur additional expense if it's, something like the NTAP update, So I think we could be a little bit flexible there. And then also certainly, with respect to committee meetings, there are many advantages to being able to tackle issues virtually and being able to meet virtually. It expands our flexibility to address something quickly instead of trying to, schedule something around the extra time that's needed to travel. But, given some of the issues that, I see up on the screen and the table for, moving forward on rec reform, that could be beneficial for some of our committees to meet in person where there's, a full day's worth of issues to discuss. Thanks.
Yeah, Michelle, that's a great point and something we've talked about, and one of the things that I'd like to keep for all of us to keep in mind, and something that I think is important for efficiency, is to come up with a standard that's consistent, so that every time there's a meeting being planned, that there's not a question as to whether or not we're going to do it via a hybrid model or an in-person. And so I think coming up with those standards and being consistent would be a really good way, not only for council members, but for the public to know what's expected and what their opportunities are for participation. So all really good comments. I'm going to wrap things up with Joe, and then I'm going to turn the mic back over to Chris, I'll go to the public as well. But go ahead, Joe.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm glad I'm going last because I think everything that needed to be said was already said. But, ASMFC leadership is struggling with this as well. There are some things that are unique to ASMFC at the commission level. We need to have that caucus. So that hope that board members will make that commitment to show back up is something that, Spud and I certainly have. But from Sarah all the way to Michelle, the comments on public's participation is, even here at the council, we may have a 2-hour meeting that's so important to somebody from North Carolina, but they have to get to Long Island to make those comments. It just doesn't seem right. But, with that said, I think that there's some level of hybridization for this for us in the future, both at councils and commissions. Because otherwise, what happened? We got past something that was so historically painful to all of us, and we didn't learn any lessons. It's like we have to come out on the other side where we adapted at some point. That's my personal opinion. Thank you.
No, I agree, Joe. And, if we try to blend the two ideas together right now, so we've got this table of work that we're planning, but we also have this idea of bringing people together. And I certainly understand. I mean, we saw it this week with the joint meeting that we had. We had an hour-long discussion with the Bluefish Board. Bluefish Board is every state from Maine to Florida. And we had a few representatives from the board here, but was it really, was it expected that all the board members from all the states were here? Probably not. No, I mean, I didn't have that expectation. Now, if we're making some really hard decisions and we're, having a full day meeting and discussing something that, or getting to final action on something, I would think more people would want to be there. So again, these are the challenges that we face, but Joe, I agree. If we don't come out at the other side of this, having learned something, I think our credibility goes out the window there with that. So I will stop. I will jump down off my soapbox here, and but I do appreciate the comments around the table and agree with just about everything said. So Chris, I'm going to turn back to you, and Adam just raised his hand. Adam, go ahead.
I was just going to get back to this when you're ready.
Yep, go ahead, Adam.
I had made the comment the other day about hoping to bring all of our recreational species back to the same timeline for spec setting for rec measures. Do you have an idea where that would fall into any of these line items right now for discussion, or is that something that still needs to go back to staff to decide where we're going to start working on that?
So, yeah, I'd like to talk to staff, Adam, and get back to you on that. So again, we'll plan on having a good discussion in October and see where it takes us.
All right, thank you for that. Is there anyone from the public that would like to offer any thoughts? Bonnie?
Bonnie Brady, Long Island Commercial Fishing Association. As the person that lives in one of the you can't get there from here type places, and being on 5 APs on 2 councils, I think when you're dealing with APs or council meetings, I think if there is the effort in the future to be there, because if you're not there, you're missing part of it. And trying to, as much as I've gone to places that have to go to Boston and have to leave like 12 hours before, if you're not there, you're missing part of the conversation. You're missing the sidebars. It's really important. I think, however, for the public, what the council has done, and I mean this sincerely, the Mid-Atlantic has done amazing things to be able to bring fishermen by taping, doing the FMPs, putting them on the YouTube channel, being able to review this stuff because, they leave in darkness and come home in darkness and they don't have another time to look at it. So I think as far as in allowing hybrids for the public to speak, but I think if it's an important issue for the board or for an AP, there's nothing that beats being in person because you've got that opportunity to spitball that, through text doesn't really cut it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Bonnie. James, in order to save us a little time, I'm just going to summarize what you had written. So James Fletcher offered that his comment would be that all council meetings are at the same location every time near a low-cost location in the airport. And so we'll take that into consideration as well. So thanks, everyone. I don't see any other hands at this time. Thank you for the comments, and let's go ahead. I think in the interest of time, we need to move on. Chris?
Mr. Chair, continuing with the items behind the tab, there's a document that you have seen before, status of council actions under development. And this is a good reference document to list all the things that we have on our plate and that we're working on or will be working on. These include some of the items that I've already mentioned. So you take a look at that if you haven't looked at that recently. The next one is a timeline of our actions, amendments, frameworks that are under review by NIMFS. And again, this is an important document just to keep track of things, at least from my perspective. And I've used it to answer questions about where things are in the process. And it's very helpful, at least to me. So hopefully it's helpful to other folks. I will note a couple of things of interest. The excessive shares amendment, as I understand it, is actually going to get on the street here shortly. The NOA was, and Sarah, I'm sure, is going to talk about this in her report, is going to be published very soon if it hasn't been published already. I also misspoke about the Black Sea Bass State Commercial, or the Black Sea Bass Commercial State Allocation Amendment. I thought it was in Garpo purgatory, but now it's in Julia purgatory. So they've actually sent it back. We'll be getting those edits done and getting that back to Garpo. And then there's the other table there with all the specifications. You can take a look at that. The next item, pretty straightforward. Any questions before I go to Carson? See any on that? So the next item behind the tab is a memo from Carson to me that I asked her to put together for us, basically to update us on all things protected resources. So if I could, Mr. Chair, I'd like to turn it over to Carson to have her talk to us about whales, sturgeons, and turtles.
Sure thing. Carson?
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Chris. So I'll try not to repeat anything that we talked about yesterday under sturgeon, but I'm going to walk through these issues, and then everything in this document, there's a few things that have come up after this document was sent to the council. So I'll cover those new things as well. So the Atlantic Large Whale Take Reduction Team is currently working on phase 2 of the Atlantic Large Whale Take Reduction Plan. And this phase is focusing on reducing the risk of entanglement to right humpback and fin whales in the East Coast gillnet and mixed species trap pot and mid-Atlantic lobster and Jonah crab fisheries. And the TRT last met in May. At that meeting, they identified several potential collections of measures to be further analyzed. And then the results of these analyses are tentatively scheduled to be presented to the TRT on September 8th. So that's a briefing webinar, and then the phase 2 final recommendations are scheduled to be developed at the September 19th and 22nd two-day meeting. So the council will plan to hold a Protected Resources Committee meeting in the week before that September 19th, 22nd TRT meeting, and that can inform the council's representation on the TRT before those final recommendations are made. And then the Protected Resources Committee meeting date will actually be finalized today. So I polled the committee this week. Thank you everyone for your responses, and we'll set that date this afternoon. And then since this memo was written, NIFS has released a draft of their ropeless roadmap, and that describes the current state of on-demand or ropeless fishing and outlines a path for increasing adoption of this technology in commercial fisheries on the East Coast. And then NIMS has indicated that they're welcoming public input on this draft. So this is something that can be reviewed by the council. I spoke with leadership about this yesterday, and I think that that's something that we can do at our October meeting. And then I'll also be attending an informational webinar on that this afternoon at 2:30, which is an update to the TRT. But all TRT meetings are public as well. And then additionally, on August 1st, NIMS announced proposed changes to the North Atlantic right whale vessel speed regulations to further reduce the likelihood of mortalities and serious injuries to endangered right whales from vessel collisions. And so the proposed changes would expand the mandatory speed restrictions of 10 knots or less in designated areas of the ocean to include most vessels 35 to 65 feet in length, and broaden the spatial boundaries and timing of these zones on the East Coast. And so NIMS is having informational webinars on these proposed changes. The next one is this coming Tuesday, August 16th. I'll be attending that one. And there's another one on August 24th. And Mary has shared that NIMS announcement of this rule to our council latest news section on our website, since this will impact our stakeholders. And then I just wanted to add that the vessel speed regulations proposed rule is not part of the take reduction team's work, which focuses on the gear entanglement reduction. So that's all I have for whales right now. Moving on to Atlantic sturgeon, we covered this pretty well yesterday. Where we left off is that council leadership will discuss the potential for a joint letter with comments on that draft action plan Beyond that, the Protected Resources Committee meeting can meet as needed to respond to that final action plan once it's released. And that can depend on how the two councils want to respond to that. So that's all I have for sturgeon. And then moving on to sea turtles, there's no new developments since the presentation that this group received in April. So at the April meeting, the council received a presentation from NOAA Fisheries staff on their public outreach efforts related to sea turtle bycatch, gear research, and potential mitigation measures in trawl fisheries. Stakeholder feedback throughout the outreach consisted of a lot of clarifying questions as well as concerns about the sea turtle bycatch estimates, data used, and research results. And NOAA Fisheries staff has indicated that there's more work to be done, and they are approximately a year away from any proposed rule stage. It's unclear at this point if there's going to be a working group or how those any mitigation measures would be developed. And then lastly, we have the recent court ruling that was mentioned yesterday with this group discussing sturgeon, but this court ruling is relevant to the ongoing sturgeon and whale issues. So that court ruling, which is linked in the memo that I sent to Chris, has found that NIMS violated the ESA by failing to satisfy the MMPA's negligible impact requirement before setting the authorized level of lethal take in its incidental take statement. NIMS also breached the time requirements mandated by the MMPA in the 2021 final rule related to the right whale take reduction measures. So the court will hold the 2021 biological opinion and the 2021 final rule to be invalid. This document goes on to say that the court will offer the parties the opportunity to for further briefing to articulate alternatives that the court may select. So at this time, it's unclear how this ruling will impact the ongoing sturgeon and whale actions and timelines, given that they're both linked to the 2021 BIOP. And we do have a response from the Sturgeon Action Plan lead when I asked about this, indicating that as the litigation is ongoing and the court has not yet ruled on a remedy, they have no further comment at this point, but they are continuing to develop the action plan that will be finalized in September. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Carson. Any questions for Carson from the council? Sonny Glenn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a FYI, I'm to meet with the NIMS gear researchers Monday, and I'm going to start some work with the ropeless buoying. And if so need, I'll keep the committee and the council informed on how that works and turns out. And also one question on the turtles. I know they have a slowdown for whales, but is there any talk or concern about slowdowns for turtles?
Carson?
None that I'm aware of at the top of my head, but I would have to follow up on that and ask the turtle folks about it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Adam Nowalski?
Do we have a plan for offering council comments on the speed restrictions? I understand that the informational webinars are not going to be accepting comments on the webinars themselves. My understanding is comments can only be submitted via written. So do we have a plan for that since we won't have another council meeting between now and then?
Carson?
So the comments for the vessel speed zones are due September 30th. So if this group wanted to discuss that now, or we can add that to the agenda for our Protected Resources Committee meeting as well. So that was focusing on TRT things, but we can address that at that meeting as well for developing comments.
Yeah, thanks, Carson. I thought that that's what we had kind of, settled on, but go ahead, Adam.
So if we do that through the PR committee, and then what the plan would be to distribute a draft to the full council for all council members to provide feedback on at that point? And are we comfortable that between the PR committee and the comment deadline that we'll have the ability to take comments from the PR committee, draft those comments into a letter, get them around to all council members with time for them to review, revise the letter, and then get it in? Or are we really good with that timeline?
Chris?
So we just did something similar with our Hudson Canyon letter. And tight timeline, not what we pick if we had a choice, but given the circumstance, that's what we'll do. So you'll get a chance to look at the letter. You collectively, the council, get a chance to look at a draft letter, and you won't have a lot of time to provide any additional comment. So, just anticipate that. And again, it's just because of the constraints that we have relative to the timeline.
So given that committee assignments are coming up shortly, I think I just recommend that when you notice that PR committee and send everything around, maybe don't just limit that to the PR committee members. Let all the council members know what's going on. So if council members want to get on to that committee meeting but aren't part of the committee, they'd have the opportunity to hear what's going on and start that ball rolling.
Yep, that would be the plan. Thanks, Adam. Skip Filler.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Commissioner. This is on the speed limit thing. I've talked to Carson, so she's aware of everything. I just wanted to inform everybody else, because probably everybody doesn't know. So the speed limit is in different areas. In our area, it's a 20-mile circle, and it's anything right now over 65 feet. And I'm fine with it going to 35 feet. That basically encompasses everybody. I'm pretty sure this is stemmed from the sport boat that hit and killed a right whale mom and calf down below South Carolina last year. But the issue is all government boats are exempt. And I can understand in a emergency or a wartime, but we observe the Navy coming and going all the time. I have a picture last year of us sitting there watching a humpback, and a Navy frigate is coming inbound. So obviously there's no emergency, doing 22.3 knots. And all it's going to take a Navy boat to hit a whale in front of a whale watch boat with 100 people with 100 cameras going. And then it's going to be even a bigger problem. So I don't understand. There again, in emergency situations, I can see it. But, as far as them being exempt in these small areas, they can do 10 knots like everybody else until they get outside the area and then go on and do whatever. But it's definitely been an issue. And not very many people know that, all these big ships are coming and going doing 10 knots. And it's basically the Navy that comes and goes as they please.
Yeah, I appreciate that information, Skip. Well, I'm sure that'll be part of the discussion as we consider this action moving forward.
It seems like Carson can't get a response. She sent several.
Well, Carson's pushy enough, so she'll keep pushing, and I'm sure she'll get something at some point. Okay, so Sonny and Skip have if you guys can put your hands down. Let me go to Mike Wayne in the public. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike Wayne with the American Sport Fishing Association. I'm encouraged to hear that the council is going to put some comments together on the vessel speed restriction, but I'm looking at the proposed rule. I'm looking at the maps of the proposed closed areas that essentially run from Florida all the way to Massachusetts along the continental shelf. And I'm looking at the public comment process, and I'm just wondering how NIMS kind of arrived at what we have, which is 3 public webinars that are question and answer only, and about a 2.5 or whatever 60-day comment period. And from what I can tell, no real engagement with any of the regional councils along the proposed closed area. So or sorry, the proposed vessel speed restriction area. So I don't know if Garfo wants to weigh in on this, but I understand this is a very important topic. We consider it a very important topic, but the potential impacts to, I think, both sectors, and specifically the recreational fishing community that fishes in the seasonal times in which these speed restrictions would occur will have huge impacts. And I would recommend that the agency engage the councils on this in a much more formal way. I fully expected this to be on the agenda this week. I expected protected resources to be presenting to the council. I mean, remember, the council members represent the constituents across the region. So I really do feel like there's a huge missed opportunity here, and I would love to hear if Garfo has any input on ways to improve the public comment process on this.
Okay, Mike, thanks. I'm going to turn to Sarah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my first comment would be, I think there's been some great points raised today, including what Skip mentioned, and I would urge the council to comment on all of that and make sure all of those comments do get into us. As I think Carson mentioned earlier, this rule was coordinated out of our headquarters Office of Protected Resources, not Garfo. So I don't have a lot of details on, why, the webinars were set up the way they were. But I take all of your points and your questions, and I can certainly bring those back and see if I can get a little bit more information that we can then relay to Carson and Chris to help you all compile comments to submit.
All right, thank you for that, Sarah. Lieutenant Commander Cayley.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I was going to comment on the speed restriction part, and to Skip's point, on the government side, so our vessels that are above that 65 feet restrictions, we do abide by those when they're in place during the seasonality portion. When there's a search and rescue case, we do go above that for emergency situations. And so I can't speak on the Navy's behalf, but I know from our perspective, our cutters and our skippers of those boats know the speed restrictions. On the enforcement side, the speed restrictions that are currently in place with the 65-foot vessels, they are challenging to enforce because we're not able to have a vessel on scene all the time to do a boarding when we do observe a vessel that is going above that speed restriction. For the deep draft vessels that are coming in and out, we do hail outs. We're able to track the speed based on the AIS, and we do hail out to them to slow down. But it is challenging unless we have a vessel on scene that can do a boarding to observe the speed. It's challenging for violations on those. So the restrictions to 35 feet will make it doubly challenging and also affect our small boat resources. So from the comments perspective, we'll be providing those through headquarters on that, but just wanted to comment on it a little bit. It's from the Coast Guard side. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And I can understand you not wanting to speak and get in trouble with the Navy. That's the last thing you guys need down there. Okay, I think it's time we should move on. Chris is going to try to get through the rest of his executive director's report, and then we'll take a short break in case you need to check out before 11. So go ahead, Chris.
Mr. Chair, and thank you, Carson, for the PR update. By the way, for folks that don't know, Carson's last name has changed. Someone asked me, who's that guy, Carson Cisneros? So it's the same Carson that we've always had, but her name now Cisneros, not Goutre. So thanks, Carson. The next item is behind the tab is actually a document that you've seen before. It's an email from Kelly Dennett to the executive directors highlighting a project proposal from NIMS to develop guidance on the use of Section 304F, the Magnuson Act, in response to changes in species distribution. This is something that we talked about briefly in June. I expressed concern at the CCC meeting relative to the development of this policy. We don't need to go over that again, except to say that take a look at the document that's attached to that email. see if you have any concerns or questions, and certainly provide those to me. My main concern is that this is being developed right as we develop, or right as we're in the middle of our scenario planning project. So again, I expressed the number, well, I'm concerned about that. And certainly, again, if you see anything in that document that you'd like to talk to me about, certainly. The next item behind the tab is something that I've already referenced, which is a email from Russ Dunn to me. This is actually in the supplement section of the briefing book, if you're looking. This is basically an indication that NOAA is revising their recreational fisheries policy. That comment period ends December 31st. We will have a briefing at the October meeting to talk about that and provide comments to NOAA NIMS on that particular item. The other thing is an email that I've sent out. It's also posted. The South Atlantic Council is looking for folks to serve on their mackerel cobia AP. Those would be folks from the Mid-Atlantic, so that request has come to us. Mary has posted the notice on our website soliciting applications for that. Looking for one commercial representative and one recreational representative, obviously that have some link to mackerel, Spanish or king mackerel. And we are encountering Spanish and king mackerel more frequently in the Mid-Atlantic, north of North Carolina. So really, it would be a good idea for us to find some really good folks to be on that particular AP. Yeah, and it also involves cobia, although I think cobia is being handled at this point, right? Even though they still have it on their committee, but yeah, the focus is definitely mackerel. Last but not least, I sent an email out yesterday. NOAA's looking for individuals to populate an American Fisheries Advisory Committee. So take a look at that email. They are looking for council members to be on that particular committee. If you have any questions, you can send an email to the folks at NOAA, or you can call me and we can talk about it. But everything that you need to do is listed at email. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'm done. I'd glad to take any questions.
All right, thanks, Chris. Any questions for Chris on the last few items that he reported on? Okay, I don't see any hands at this time. Anyone from the public? Nothing at this time. Appreciate your report, Chris. It's 10:46. Let's break until we'll come back at 11 o'clock and we'll wrap up with our organization and liaison reports. See you back here in 14 minutes. Thank you. Okay, this is everyone's 2-minute warning. Start to take your seats. We're going to start up again in 2 minutes. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We're going to go ahead and wrap up our morning session here today. We have organization reports, which we'll start with, and then we'll wrap up with liaison reports. Just for timing purposes, I'd like to try to get us done by around noon. So I know a lot of you drove here or have vehicles to, so that's kind of the timing that I'm thinking. We'll see how the discussions go. But I'd like to try to get us done in about an hour. With that, I'm going to turn to Sarah Bland with the regional office for Garfo's report. Go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I announced this the other day, but to cover it again, the proposed rule for Amendment 22 to the Summer Flounder, Scup, and Black Sea Bass Plan, which is the Commercial Recreational Reallocation Amendment, published today. The action proposes changes to the commercial and recreational sector allocations for the 3 species. The comment period for the proposed rule closes on September 12th. The comment period for the notice of availability closes on October 11th. Also on June 9th, we published the final rule for the 2022 Summer Flounder, Scup, and Black Sea Bass recreational management measures. The rule adopted conservation equivalency for summer flounder and black sea bass. State or regional measures can be liberalized to achieve up to a 16.5% increase in summer flounder harvest and a harvest reduction of at least 20.7% for black sea bass. As you all know, we proposed a closure of the federal scup fishery, but did not implement the closure. We implemented a 1-inch minimum size increase for scup, given a number of factors, including the social and economic impacts, the stock status, and anticipated council and board action on recreational reform. And as Chris alluded to earlier, for the excessive shares for the surf clam and ocean quahog excessive shares amendment, which is Amendment 20 to that plan, the notice of availability published yesterday, August 10th, and the comment period is open through October 11th. This action proposes to implement limits on the amount of quota share or annual cage tags that participants in the ITQ fishery could hold. The amendment also adjusts the maximum duration of multi-year specifications to better align the stock assessment schedules, and updates to the fishery management goals and objectives are also included in this action. For tilefish on October 2nd, we published a proposed rule for the specifications through 2024. The proposed specifications are status quo from 2021. The comment period for this action closes on August 17th. For Northeast multi-species, one in particular for the 2022 recreational measures for Gulf of Maine cod and haddock, we published a proposed rule for these 2022 measures on August 2nd, and comments on the proposed rule are being accepted through August 17th, which is next Friday. Proposed measures include an expanded fall season for Gulf of Maine cod, beginning on September 1st through October 7th for all recreational modes, and a 20 fish limit for Gulf of Maine haddock. And I'll note on this one, the comment period for the proposed rule closes on August 17th, And the expanded fall season that is proposed begins on September 1st. So we're aware of the timing component with September 1st, and we intend to very quickly turn around a final rule for those recreational measures. For Atlantic herring, on July 19th, we published a final rule approving Framework 9 to the Fishery Management Plan. This action established a rebuilding plan for herring and also adjusted accountability measure catch threshold triggers when catch exceeds either the herring sub-ACL or herring ACL or management area sub-ACL. For monkfish, on April 21st, we published the final rule implementing 2022 specifications for the monkfish fishery. We reviewed available fishery information for fishing years 2020 and 2021, and there were no annual catch limit overages, nor was there any new biological information that required changes to the 2022 specifications from those that were previously announced when we approved Framework 12 to the Fishery Management Plan. For skates, on June 22nd, we approved Amendment 8 to the Northeast Skate Complex, FMP. This amendment revised 2 of the 7 management objectives within the Fishery Management Plan as recommended by the New England Council to update guidance for regulatory decisions and ensure that skate management continues to reflect the current needs and condition of the fishery. For lobster, on July 11th, we published a proposed rule to complement the Commission's action to Amendment 3 to the Interstate FMP. The proposed measures include ownership caps in areas 2 and 3, a reduction in the Area 3 maximum trap cap, and mandatory harvester reporting for all federal lobster permit holders using the electronic vessel trip report, including several new lobster-specific data elements. We're accepting comments on the proposed rule and Paperwork Reduction Act analysis through August 10th, which was yesterday, so the comment period closed. One update related to cooperative research. The NIMS headquarters established a policy recently that NIMS grant recipients must ensure that any commercial fishing vessels that they are contracting have the required permits or letters of designation to safely conduct research on board those commercial vessels, consistent with U.S. Coast Guard regulation. These new requirements will be a condition of all new financial assistance awards, and grant recipients must prove compliance. And just to be clear, the Coast Guard requirements are not new. The new requirement is that grant recipients now have to provide NOAA with proof of compliance with those Coast Guard requirements as a condition of the award. We're working to evaluate what the impacts of this change is, particularly for a lot of our cooperative research related to within our research set-aside programs. And we intend to keep the council's industry and all of our cooperative research partners updated as we learn more on that one. And that is it for my report.
All right, thanks, Sarah, for the report. Any questions? Any comments? Looks like we have one question or comment from James Fletcher. Go ahead, James.
Question is, why do we keep adding more paperwork on anything else? It's almost impossible for the average commercial fisherman to work with the scientists. Now we're going to put another piece of paperwork between it. When is somebody going to learn the word cooperation rather than prevention? It is extremely frustrating, but it does no good. I don't know. Does NOAA not want the person that can think outside of the box, or do they only want their select few to get the damn grants and permits? This is stupid. Thank you. I'm representing the United National Fishermen's Association and nobody else. This is my comment.
All right, thanks for your comment, James. Is there anything else for Sarah? Seeing, oh, I keep losing my screen. Give me 1 second. Okay, seeing no other questions or comments at this time, thank you, Sarah, for your report. We're going to turn next to the Science Center. Dr. John Hare, I believe, is with us. virtually. John, are you giving the report today?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I assume you can hear me?
Yep.
Very good. Yeah, so first I just want to thank the Mid-Atlantic Fisheries Management Council for supporting the facilitator and the review of the ELEX research track assessment. And I want to thank CBI for facilitating and conducting that review. The Northeast Fisheries Science Center interest in this review is to improve the research track assessment process. And we are already working with the NRCC on addressing some of the recommendations. And we look forward to working as part of the NRCC to learn as much as we can from the review and to continue to improve the research track assessment process. So just running through some center updates in terms of our operations. We are working, we have 5 facilities, and the sort of the level of work that we can do in our facilities are tied to the CDC community spread levels. So we've gone from moderate to high to moderate to low to, we've gone back and forth. And that impacts the number of staff that we can have in our laboratories in any given day. But we are, most of our laboratory work and, all of our field work is ongoing, and we have people sort of in and out of the laboratories depending on the CDC level. Our field and laboratory operations continue. Some disruption due to COVID, due to this sort of change in these CDC levels, but largely successful. And we anticipate, continuing to be successful as we continue through the pandemic. In terms of a budget update, we've got our FY22 budget, and we reported on that at the last meeting. We're in the midst of our FY23 budget planning, and we use the FY22 budget as our planning, as our starting point. We are expecting, there's been a lot of talk about increases, cost increases. There's the inflation cost increases, salary increases. So we need to prepare for that in our 23 budget planning. The administration's FY23 budget request included increases for survey activities, for climate, for our activities related to offshore wind energy, among other things. And so the administration request is very positive for us. Congress is working on sort of the FY23 budget with both the House and Senate having committee marks. So we're continuing our planning, but we're optimistic that there will be increases in funding for some of these priority areas. But we are expecting a continuing resolution for the first quarter, and we're working to try to have that be as least disruptive as possible, particularly around our surveys. In terms of our survey and data collection activities, preparation for the fall bottom trawl survey has started. We're staging some equipment, and we're working right now on Bigelow, an acoustic research survey in cooperation with Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and using that as an opportunity to sort of do some of our bottom trawl survey pre-staging. The bottom trawl survey will be 3-week legs instead of the normal 4 legs. We still have our COVID testing protocols, but we expect to be back at a full science complement. So that should increase the amount of biological sampling that we're able to do during the survey. Our scallop survey was completed in FY22, and we were able to fund the FY23 vessel costs with the additional survey funding that we received in FY22. With that additional survey funding we received in FY22, we also fully supported the VIMS and Maine, New Hampshire NEMAP surveys. So Maine, New Hampshire was fully supported for their calendar year 22 activities, and the VIMS survey was fully supported for their fall 22 and spring 23 survey activities. So we're looking for those funds to, again, in the FY23 budget to get to the place where we're able to fully fund those surveys on an annual basis. Our northern shrimp survey was completed in July, and we used the additional funding we received in FY22 for surveys to fund that. And our clam survey is going to be in August, so that's getting underway soon. So the increase in funding that we received in FY22 for surveys, NOAA Fisheries received $8 million increase, and in the Northeast region, those funds were used to fully fund the VIMS and Maine, New Hampshire NEMAP survey, to fund our scallop survey vessel costs in FY23, and to fund our shrimp survey in FY22. And this just reflects the increase in survey costs. This increase in survey costs is affecting all of our surveys. So we were very thankful to Congress for providing additional funds to NOAA Fisheries to cover these increasing costs. On the Northeast Trawl Advisory Panel, Hannah gave an excellent report. Thank you, Hannah. And I just want to emphasize the comments made by Dr. Rago, that the work of NTAP is making its way into stock assessments, and the Northeast Fisheries Science Center remains committed to supporting, participating, and using the work of the Northeast Trawl Advisory Panel. And the restrictor rope work that's ongoing now is an example when we are working with NTAP and the VIMS group to conduct that work and analyze those results. In terms of the observer program, 100% of the observers are fully vaccinated. We have had some positive cases in the observers since August 2020, and the observer companies have been following their protocols for dealing with those. And then we are still, deploying observers with, caution, taking precautionary measures when there is a COVID case on board a vessel which is confirmed. In terms of our coverage rates, we're about 87% of the SBRM seed day schedule was completed in Q2. We're at about a 54% coverage level in groundfish at sea monitoring program. That coverage rate went up to 99% in May, and so we are working hard to increase our actual observer rates in that fishery. And then the industry funded scallop observer rate, we're at about a 5.8 coverage with a target of 9.3. So, the observing program is still, experiencing some challenges, but we are doing our best to deploy the observers that we need to meet our scientific requirements. That really comes down to training. Our on-site training activities have resumed with full class sizes, both at the Science Center and Coonamessett Farm Foundation. We did a contract with Coonamessett Farm Foundation to provide additional at-sea monitoring training for the groundfish fishery, and they've successfully completed their 5th class. We're also working with the electronic monitoring primarily in the groundfish fishery, but we've got 2 different electronic monitoring models. There's an audit model, which entered year 2 of its operational program. In fishing year 2021, we had 25 vessels enrolled in that program, and in fishing year 2022, we now have 19 vessels enrolled in that program, but we are anticipating additional vessels to enroll over the course of the year. The second electronic monitoring model that we're using is a maximized retention model, which will be operationalized with the approval of Amendment 23. The maximum retention model operated under an EFP in 21, and at the beginning of 22, we have 8 vessels that are participating. And then when that program goes operational, we expect to have more vessels involved. In terms of, we had the question early in the council meeting about sort of the availability of observer data and discard data. From a Science Center perspective, that sort of touches 2 parts of our operations. In terms of the observer program, we are experiencing a data backlog due to a number of factors, including COVID, and then the waiver, and then a number of our debriefers left because there was little work for them to do because of the waiver. And then we have, the training that we need to make up in terms of losing observers and losing debriefers. So we are working to get through that backlog. We are making good progress and we plan to be caught up by the end of the year. And I'll keep the council apprised, how that catching up is going. And again, we're working hard to understand and prioritize, the data backlog and, catching up, working with Garfield to understand where we need to sort of prioritize the work to catch up. And we pretty much are, the observer staff have largely returned to the office, which aids in access to the trip data and also eases communication and collaboration. So we're seeing, that group in the office be much more effective. In terms of the assessments, the 2022-2026 stock assessment schedule is online. It's on the NRCC website. The spiny dogfish research track review meeting has been moved from July to December. So that's now going to coincide with the bluefish review. And the black sea bass review has been moved from December to February. And again, these shifts will not affect the management track, but we're done to give the research track working groups more time to finish their work. And that's one of the recommendations that, came out of the CBI review of ELEX research track assessment, is that we need to make sure that we're giving these groups the time necessary to complete their work. We are recruiting 2 people for a research track steering committee to help oversee, as an NRCC is recruiting 2 people for the research track steering committee, as to help oversee the research track process. And there's a form online. I can share it with you, Chris, for you to share it with the council. People can apply by August 19th. In terms of research track, we have 5 working groups that are currently meeting. We have spiny dogfish, black sea bass, bluefish, Atlantic cod, and applying the state space model, which is a topic-based research track. And we have 4 research track working groups which recently completed their work: American Place, Butterfish, Haddock, and Elix. We have been working in these research track assessments to have a lot more stakeholder engagement. And most recently, we had a black sea bass stakeholder engagement session, and those have been, a number of people have attending, and, a lot of ideas and a lot of help to the working group coming out of those. So that's a good addition to the process, we feel. In terms of the 2024 research track working groups, golden tilefish, sea scallops, and yellowtail flounder, those working groups are in the final steps of the approval process. The NRCC approves membership, and the Northeast Fisheries Science Center just coordinates that approval. So we're working with the NRCC to approve the working group membership for those. In terms of management track assessments, the June management track review meeting was held June 27th to 29th. It was Atlantic herring and Southern New England mid-Atlantic winter flounder both passed peer review. The Elex and Butterfish were recommended as level 1s since they had just gone through the research track in March. We had an assessment oversight panel meeting in May to make recommendations for the September management track. And so that September management track is going to look at 14 groundfish stocks. And then the AOP will meet again in August to review the plan for American Place, which is scheduled for a September management track. The other, we heard earlier about the catch data. So, that the catch data point also comes in and it touches our sort of assessment group and sort of touches the catch accounting monitoring system, which the Science Center is developing with Garfo. The intent of this system is to have one source for catch data within the region. And so we are working to match landings data and discards data in this one catch accounting monitoring system. Currently the system is providing landings data, and that was used in the spring 2022 assessments and will be used going forward. And then to the question which came up earlier in the council meeting, when will that system include discard data? We anticipate CAMS will include discards data by the end of the year. The sort of the discard component is in development. We're using sort of the standard discard approaches that we have used previously in stock assessments that are happening in 2022. And then we're anticipating using CAMS fully for landings and discards in 2023. And once CAMS is complete, we will also do a peer review of the system to understand whether it's meeting the best science available criteria or not. And so that's a significant development for us in the region to be able to have one Ketchick County monitoring system in place. In terms of cooperative research and work, the Cooperative Research Branch is hosting the National Cooperative Research Annual Meeting in Narragansett, Rhode Island in September. And there will be a Northeast Cooperative Research Summit, which had been postponed in February of 2023. So look for more information on those. There'll be a New England Cooperative Research Summit in Providence on February 8th and a Mid-Atlantic Cooperative Research Summit in Hampton, Virginia on February 22nd, 2023. So look for more information as we get closer to those points. And then we heard some about the protected species. The TRT is meeting, which will sort of look at the decision support tool. The decision support tool was initially developed to evaluate entanglement risk in lobster and Jonah crab fishery, and that tool is being expanded to incorporate all fixed gear fisheries to serve as a tool for analysis for the subsequent work, phase 2 work of the TRT. Northeast Fisheries Science Center also released a roadmap to on-demand fishing, and so that is available for comment, and I will send that to Chris as well for him to distribute to the council. So we're looking for input into that roadmap and fully recognize that we need to be working together with industry and with managers to make that roadmap a reality. Just two more updates on offshore wind. Again, the president's budget included resources to support the regulatory process and to support the scientific support for the regulatory process and to support survey mitigation, which we heard about earlier in the meeting. We're finalizing our strategy for survey mitigation. We had a period of public comment, and the BOEM and NOAA fisheries teams are working to incorporate all of that comment. And we are looking to have a just final strategy completed in early September to then start implementation of that strategy going forward. And then in terms of the Ecosystem Dynamics and Assessment Group, the state of the ecosystem report for 2023 is in development. And we are working to include and develop ecosystem and socioeconomic profiles that can be then provided to the research track assessments as part of some of the information that they're considering to add more socioeconomic information into those research track assessments. And we continue to support the East Coast Climate Change Scenario Planning Initiative. Sean Lucy at the Science Center is our lead on that project, and we are fully supportive of the Mid-Atlantic Council for leading that effort for the region, and happy to provide whatever scientific support we can for that effort or for subsequent actions after the scenario planning is complete. And so the last point is we do our monthly science highlights. We distributed those via a subscription service on August 10th. And if you're not subscribed and would like to receive these science highlights, just send me an email, john.hare, H-A-R-E, @noaa.gov, and I will make sure that you get the information so you can subscribe. So thank you very much, Chair. I know that was a little long, but there's been a lot going on. Thank you.
I appreciate that, John. Thank you for your report. I'll look to the council for for any comments or questions for John regarding the Science Center report? Eric Reed.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome back, Dr. Hare. So you noted that the Bigelow's going to drop one leg out of the survey. Can you tell me what leg that is and what's going to be the downstream effect of that?
So they're not gonna drop a leg. They're just gonna do the survey in 3 legs, 3 longer legs rather than 4 shorter legs. And that's a scheduling issue. And so the whole survey will be completed, but it will be completed in 3 legs, not 4.
Okay, thank you. Eric just gave me the thumbs up that was adequate answer to his question. Anything else for John? Anyone from the public? Okay, seeing none at this time. Thank you, John, for your report. And
Thank you.
Eric mentioned, welcome back.
It's good to be back.
Great. Okay, I'm going to go next to NOAA's Office of General Counsel, John Almeida, here for your report. Go ahead, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to start with right whale litigation, specifically the Conservation Law Foundation Center for Biological Diversity case that's been referenced several times at this meeting. You may recall this case, it goes back to 2018 before Judge Boasberg in the District of Columbia. It's currently in a phase where the plaintiffs amended their complaint to challenge the 2021 Batched Fisheries Biological Opinion, the 2021 MMPA rule implementing conservation measures in the Northeast lobster and Jonah crab fisheries. Since our last meeting, the court issued a ruling on July 8th, granting the plaintiff's motion for summary judgment. In that decision, the court found that the biological opinion violated the Endangered Species Act by including an incidental take statement of 0 in the 0 take in the form of mortality and serious injury, despite anticipating that there would be such take caused by the federal fisheries. The court also found that the 2021 rule violated the MMPA by failing to accomplish the MMPA's standard of potential biological removal within 6 months of implementation. So the court ruled on the law, and following that, the court asked the parties to submit briefs on what kind of remedy should follow based on the court's ruling on the law. So at this point, we're in the middle of briefing remedy in light of the court's legal rulings, and I believe the plaintiffs will file the first brief will be filed tomorrow, and we'll have, the different parties will file briefs until the end of October. October 21st is when the last brief on remedy gets filed. The court's ruling on remedy will answer a lot of questions that we have as far as, some of what happens next in terms of what, there's basically a lot of questions right now. What will happen on the ground? We don't know yet. What will happen in terms of the agency's tasks going forward? What will the TRT be seeking to do? Some of that will be determined by what this remedy ruling tells us. So over the next couple of months, we'll be filing briefs on those issues. And after that, we'll wait for the court to issue a decision on a remedy. You may recall that there's a second case before Judge Boasberg, this one brought by the Maine Lobstermen's Association, that also challenges the 2021 biological opinion and MMPA rule. This case is fully briefed on motions for summary judgment, but the court hasn't issued a ruling yet. And at a status conference after the court issued its ruling in the Conservation Law Foundation case, the court asked the parties to file briefs on whether the Maine Lobstermen's Association case should be stayed until there's resolution on the remedy issues in the CLF case. These briefs have been filed, and we're waiting on a decision from the court what it's going to do. whether the court is going to, hold off on, stay the case, or if the court is going to rule on the motions for summary judgment that are fully briefed before the court. The third case on right whales and the lobster fishery is up in the District of Maine. You may recall this one was a narrower case. It was a challenge to the portion of the 2021 rule that implemented area closure, seasonal area closure in LMA 1 from October to the end of January. This case last fall, we had the district court enter a preliminary injunction stopping the agency from implementing this closure, and NIMS appealed the decision to the First Circuit. At this point, the First Circuit has ruled in favor of NIMS. On July 12th, we received a favorable ruling in the First Circuit, and on August 3rd, the First Circuit issued its mandate on the appeal. That's a formality of the court, which transmits the case back to the district court. So that case is now back in the district court, and we expect that the district court will provide a briefing schedule for that case to go forward. Other non-right whale cases, the summer flounder litigation, the state of New York's challenge to Summer Flounder Amendment 22, that's the state commercial allocation amendment. That is on appeal to the Second Circuit. We still don't have a briefing schedule on that case. May recall a case in the District of Massachusetts brought by the Sustainable Fisheries Coalition challenging the New England Council's Amendment 8 to the herring FMP. Specifically challenging the inshore midwater trawl restricted area. The district court ruled in favor of the plaintiffs. And I think at our last meeting, I reported that the Department of Justice had filed a notice of appeal to the First Circuit. Since our last meeting, the Department of Justice has withdrawn this notice of appeal. So that appeal has gone away, and the district court's judgment will stand. And then finally, with the river herring litigation, this case brought by the Natural Resources Defense Council in the District of Columbia. You may recall that the court ruled in NIMS's favor on most claims in the case, but there were 2 points where the court ruled against NIMS. And in April of 2022, the court issued an order for NIMS to address those 2 points. Consistent with that order, at the end of June, NIMS filed supplemental explanation of the 2 issues that were identified. And this week, the plaintiffs indicated that they're not challenging the agency's supplemental explanation. So at this point, it's before the court to decide if the case can be closed, because the remand has been addressed. The plaintiffs aren't challenging it. So it's now for the court to decide whether it's time to close the case or not. That's all I have for my report. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Okay, thanks, John. Appreciate your report. Are there any questions or comments for John? Anyone from the public? Or should I say, and does Bonnie have any questions? Seeing none, John, thanks for the report. We'll look forward to the continued update on the right whale litigation. I know that's one. It's everywhere I go, every meeting I go to, somebody's talking about it. So thanks for your update on that. Okay, we're going to go ahead and turn our attention to NOAA's Office of Law Enforcement. We have Caleb Gilbert with us. Caleb?
Can you hear me okay, Mr. Chairman?
We can, thank you.
Excellent. I don't have any slides for today as usual, just a few points I'll try to get through quickly. We did submit a written report for this meeting. My apologies, we didn't get it to the council until late yesterday. I guess I should suggest that you please reach out to council staff or myself if you'd like a copy of that report. I reported on I believe, 2 priority focus areas for the Northeast Division of NOAA Fisheries Office of Law Enforcement. The last 2 Mid-Atlantic Council meetings, those were North Atlantic right whale related conservation enforcement and increased effort to reduce the occurrence of observer related incidents. Those remain our 2 priorities within NED. And as I believe I promised at the June council meeting, the written OLE report for today's meeting includes a summary of all of our third quarter right whale enforcement efforts, both on speed enforcement and phase 1 Atlantic large whale take reduction plan enforcement. Those enforcement efforts continued into the fourth quarter. Related to speed enforcement, the seasonal management area season concluded on July 31st, but Atlantic large whale take reduction plan gear enforcement efforts are ongoing. Right now, I only plan to summarize some key metrics related to our third quarter written report and then cover a couple highlights that have occurred so far in the fourth quarter. Related to our third quarter Atlantic large whale take reduction plan enforcement, we included figures to highlight our efforts in the written report. I believe figure 2 illustrates relative compliance rate in the fixed gear lobster and crab pot trap fishery with the new Altwerp regs. For our estimate of compliance rate, we considered gear inspected on an individual lobster boat to be non-compliant if it had at least one Altwerp-related compliance issue. So out of 260, approximately 260 individual vessels whose fixed gear was inspected by boarding officers, there were no observed Altwerp violations on 190 of those vessels. That's for a compliance rate of 73%. But keep in mind, this is across the third quarter, April through June, and so we were doing vessel inspections in April prior to the regs becoming implemented. So that was across 49 documented at-sea and land-based patrols that largely incorporated or were dedicated to Altwerp enforcement. I believe figure 3 illustrates a breakdown of those patrols by enforcement partners. On the speed enforcement side, in early April, 5 $7,500 NOVAs were issued to vessel owners being investigated for violating the ship strike reduction rule. Each individual vessel was documented by AIS to be in excess of speed restrictions while transiting various seasonal management areas. In addition, this June, we reached a settlement with a repeat offender of the speed rule for more than $50,000. Many of the speed rule NOVAs involve pleasure crafts, and we expect the amended speed rule, which will lower the minimum size of the vessels regulated from 65 feet to 35 feet, to significantly impact this user group. While speed enforcement is routinely incorporated into patrol efforts, both by the Northeast Division and our state and U.S. Coast Guard enforcement partners, the Northeast Division led 2 speed enforcement ops in the third quarter FY22. In mid-April, over the course of 5 days, NED Division 2 enforcement officers patrolled the Delaware Bay SMA seasonal management area in cooperation with Delaware and New Jersey Joint Enforcement Agreement partners, as well as U.S. Coast Guard D5, Division 5. Our investigative support program staff also collaborated in the op, providing officers in the field with real-time vessel locations. And in mid-May, a special agent and several enforcement officers conducted a 3-day multi-agency North Atlantic right whale speed enforcement operation in the Cape Cod Bay SMA. 5 enforcement vessels and crews participated in that operation, including one from U.S. Coast Guard Station Provincetown, 3 from the Massachusetts Environmental Police, and the NOAA Northeast Division Division 1 patrol vessel. Vessels over 65 feet and some smaller were checked via radar and AIS during that op, and again, the NED's investigative support program assisted in that op. Related to our, moving on from right whale conservation enforcement, related to our priority to reduce the overall number of observer-related incidents, in addition to the observer roundtable events mentioned in the written report for this meeting and our oral report to the council last June, our Division 2 senior enforcement officer participated in a productive 3rd roundtable event last week in Wanchese, North Carolina. Also in North Carolina, on the Outer Banks, the same week, that same senior enforcement officer assisted 2 center FMO staff with dockside outreach by engaging in dialogue with several fishermen and distributing hard copy information. I actually also participated in a similar outreach event alongside Center FMO staff and observer providers in Chatham, Mass last month to help convey observer requirements to industry there. So that's it for the third quarter summary. Moving on to the fourth quarter, there were a couple highlights I wanted to share with the council today. One, on July 15th, a federal judge ruled that 4 defendant seafood importers were guilty of a conspiracy to illegally smuggle prohibited catfish into the U.S. Special agents and investigators from NOAA Fisheries Office of Law Enforcement and a whole large group of other federal enforcement agencies all collaborated on the case. This case is noteworthy because in addition to removing an estimated 43,800 pounds of illegal catfish from the seafood supply chain, this was the first case related to our seafood import monitoring program that resulted in criminal penalties. Last I'll mention, we've conducted 12 patrols so far this quarter, 5 of which were Altwerp focused. Last week alone, many of our Division 2 staff participated in 3 separate patrols between New Jersey and Ocean City, Maryland. The patrol out of Ocean City took place on 3 consecutive days. Multiple fisheries were targeted both recreationally and commercially in these efforts. It will likely be too early in the new fiscal year to provide a fourth quarter written report for the coming October meeting, similar to the third quarter written report provided for this week's meeting. So if not in October, we will provide a fourth quarter OLE written report to the council at the December meeting. That's all I have for the council today, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Caleb. Does anyone have any questions regarding Caleb's report? Seeing none. Appreciate it very much, Caleb. Thank you for your report, but I don't have any questions or comments at this time.
My pleasure, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, moving to our last organization report, we have the U.S. Coast Guard report, Lieutenant Commander Matt Cayley. Go ahead, Matt.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So from the Coast Guard over the past 2 months, we've conducted a little over 100 boardings. Most of our efforts have been focused on providing an enforcement presence up around the New York Bight area that was just recently closed for scallops. What we've seen is folks are kind of going along the line. We've observed some that are going in and out very slightly, which is kind of consistent with what we've seen for the Mid-Atlantic Axis area once that was first stood up. So while we haven't had any violations there, we'll continue to provide a presence out there to enforce the closed area. We've also, during the past 2 months, HMS has been a focus for us in boarding vessels that are targeting HMS as they migrate north for the tunas up along the canyons. And we've also had more boardings for wreck and charter fleets, which is consistent with kind of the historical seasonal patterns for boating season. Of the little over 100 boardings that we did do, we issued 2 enforcement action reports for recreational vessels that were fishing without a federal permit. We did also do a enforcement op on highly migratory species for Sector Virginia, targeted out into the canyons area to provide a presence out there. On the commercial fishing vessel safety efforts that we've done, we did 65 dockside exams, issued 62 decals, and we didn't have any terminations over the past 2 months, which is a good thing. And they continue to, our inspectors continue to provide outreach, doing dock walks and training and providing educational efforts and outreach. On the casualty front, we've had 3 marine casualties for commercial fishing vessels, 1 on a collision, fire, and then a sinking. On the collision case, a vessel struck an object and sank in the Elizabeth River channel with 4 people on board. Fortunately, we had a Coast Guard cutter witness this happen and were able to respond within minutes, and were able to save the vessels, or save the people from the vessel, and were able to transfer them to EMS with no further issues. We had a vessel that responded to a vessel on fire off of New Jersey, and the crew on board was actually able to extinguish the fire without incident, and was able to get towed back to the Lighthouse Marina there in Barnegat Light, New Jersey. And after investigation, it kind of revealed that the electrical fire on the crane wiring harness is what caused the fire to spread to the aft portion of the engine room. which affected it, but no additional concerns there on our end, and the people were able to the people were okay. They were on board. And then lastly, we had the sinking of a commercial fishing vessel. It was being towed, and the tow line broke, and unfortunately, there were no folks on board the vessel that broke the tow line, but the vessel broke apart with the waves, unfortunately. So we responded to that one. That's all I have on the enforcement side, pending any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Any questions for the Coast Guard? Peter Hughes.
Sorry, I can't find my raised hand. Thank you for your report. Recently in the news, about in the last 10 days, there was another, I guess, collision with a commercial fishing vessel and a cruise ship. Wondering if we'll hear about that in your next report.
So I don't have the specific details on that. What I did hear is that it was kind of up in the northeast area. But if there's a request for details on that, I can kind of try to provide an update at the next meeting based off of what was out there. I know that that's something that we investigate, and we have investigators depending on how long that investigation would take. But I can try to provide updates if there's interest there.
It's okay. It's just curiosity. It's how do you hit a cruise ship? And I'll be at the New England meeting, so I'm sure I'll get the briefing up there. So thank you.
Dan Farnham.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. You can hear me, right?
Yep.
Yep, very good, thank you. I'd like to speak to Peter Yu's comment and the report. Unfortunately, as some of you around the table already know, and for full disclosure, the vessel that hit the cruise ship was one of ours. I can't speak directly to the incidents that are being investigated, obviously. We are actively working with the Coast Guard right now as they conduct their investigation, and we are also conducting our own internal review of the incident. I'd like to add that we are extremely fortunate that there were no injuries to speak of on either vessel due to this incident, and I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dan, for that update. Are there any other questions for Matt? All right, seeing none, we're going to go ahead and move on to the last section of our meeting for this morning. It's still morning. We'll go to liaison reports, and we'll start with the New England Council. Peter Hughes is our liaison to the New England Council, and I'll turn to you, Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is my liaison report from the June New England Fisheries Management Council meeting that was held in Portland, Maine, and it was a hybrid meeting also. The first point would be the Monkfish Committee report, and there was a motion made, and I believe the motion was made by actually Mike Pentney, that the council remove consideration of vessel monitoring systems from the list of measures in Framework 13 to monkfish. And that motion did pass up in New England, and we'll be addressing that during our own monkfish deliberations of the council. They also set their research set-aside priorities for 2023, 2024 for monkfish. They include, and these are not listed in order, life history, trawl and gillnet gear studies, research on pingers used for monkfish gillnet gear, and research to improve the monkfish market. Next up is the Groundfish Committee report. Framework Adjustment 65, they reviewed the specification and management measures. The first thing that they did, we addressed this yesterday, the winter flounder sub-ACL. They also, the council wants to include, Georges Bank cod as a stock to pursue additional measures to promote rebuilding, and that the council considering the following for an analysis in the Amendment 23. And that would be target coverage rates versus realized coverage rates between vessels using electronic monitoring tools and at-sea human monitors. They would like also the number of trips where waivers for monitor requirements were issued and the reasons for the waivers. It would also look to evidence, what they want to review if there's evidence of any bias in text reporting, including trip duration, species composition, and size composition of landed groundfish, species composition and weight of discarded groundfish, and ratio of landed to discarded fish by species. They also want to take a look at the costs for meeting monitoring requirements, including cost comparisons between electronic monitoring and human at-sea monitoring. And they'd like to understand better the efficacy of the dockside monitoring program. There was not a report out, but if there is a live link in here that will take you to the motions that were made at that council meeting, if people would like to take a look at some of the groundfish deliberations that took place. The Habitat Committee composed a letter to BOEM, draft fisheries mitigation, similar here, that the council send BOEM a letter urging a complete programmatic environmental impact statement under NEPA for the entire Gulf of Maine planning area prior to identification of any wind energy areas. I think that's very good. They also took up the subject of the Southern New England habitat area of particular concern. I am on that committee, and it was kind of a heavy lift, but the council did select as a preferred alternative an area overlapping offshore wind lease sites in Southern New England, buffered by approximately 10 kilometers on all sides as a habitat area of particular concern due to the potential adverse impacts associated with offshore wind energy development on sensitive hard bottom habitats and cod spawning activity. That took a lot of work by the Habitat Committee, and I was personally pleased with the outcome. In regards to scallops, the scallop committee set their, or the council set the scallop research set aside priorities for 2023-24. They would include scallop resource surveys, biology, turtle research enhancement, habitat characterization, high density areas, wind energy, bycatch, small scallops and non-targeted species, and commercial dredge research. Ecosystem-based fisheries management, just an information that the New England Council will be holding 6 EBFM public information workshops later this fall. And herring and industry-funded monitoring. The council received updates on the 2023-25 specifications. They discussed the status of Framework 7 and received an update regarding industry-funded monitoring. There is a live link in there to a press release if anybody would like additional information on herring. And that, Mr. Chair, concludes my report.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Peter? Back to my screen. Adam?
Thank you. Do either you or the chairman of the council know if those EBFM sessions are going to be hosted by the committee, or is that something just going to be hosted by staff from the New England Council?
I am not sure. I'll look to Eric if he knows.
Yeah, we actually have a facilitator that's going to do that.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Any questions for Peter? Anyone from the public? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to our last part. Oh, Eric, did you want to add?
Yeah, the only thing I want to add is our next meeting is scheduled to start on Monday, September 26th, early in the afternoon. And we will probably go right through till Thursday afternoon. It's a fairly long agenda. The agenda is still in draft, but it's going to be busy. But anybody that's interested, I just want to give you the heads up. We're going to start on Monday afternoon.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Okay, moving on to our our second liaison report with the South Atlantic. I'm going to turn to Dewey for that report.
The South Atlantic Council met in Key West, Florida. Interesting, a lot of roosters around at the complex we were staying in, and also a bunch of some very large iguanas that were around. But as usual, it's always a long meetings. There's a summary, a better written summary in the briefing book, but some of the highlights that took up a lot of time was the discussion on red snapper and the discards of the recreational industry out of season they only have a 3-day season, and also the timeline of having to address overfishing and the end overfishing. And they got some hard decisions or choices down there, and in my mind, there's only 2 options, and that the public didn't like them options. Not that I was given options, but they got some issues there. The next thing that was addressed, it looks at a management strategy evaluation for mahi is going to be developed or something. So we were right in the area where the lower Keys and South Florida are having issues with the lack of mahi or certain sizes, and the Mid-Atlantic is seeing an increase of mahi and stuff like that. And so the Science Center down there is looking at a management strategy evaluation for mahi that could be useful in the future. Also, they're doing it. The South Atlantic Council is having a team of best fishing practice outreach that's traveling around the South Atlantic to tackle stores and to the other public places to, the best fishing practices, how to handle fish, bear trauma, how to release, and stuff like that. Which is and a lot on social media about that. Also, there's been increased observer coverage. I think the Science Center down that way got some funding to probably double. There's been very limited snapper group or observer coverage in the past, and they had some funding, and they're focusing on places where there's a lot of poundage landed. And so you're going to see it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of that. There's like 550 thereabouts snapper group or permits, and they're looking to get somewhere, like 400 boats covered over the time period. So busy time down there. And if anybody's got any questions,
Yeah, I appreciate it, Dewey. Thank you for your report. Get back to my screen. It keeps going dark on me. Does anyone have any questions for Dewey? Yeah, go ahead, Dewey.
yeah, also probably interest of this council is going to be in 2024. I believe there's going to be a blue line tilefish assessment. And the South Atlantic Council or the Science Center this could be the second year of their deepwater survey that'll be starting. And last year's survey went from Key West, Florida to the Virginia, North Carolina line with Indian participation. And this year it's going to be the same thing, maybe just a few sits less, but there was over 180 sits that were done last year, 184, I believe, over the distribution of that. So maybe something between the Science Center here and the Science Center down there, they can develop something for maybe in the Mid-Atlantic region for blue line tilefish of some variance or degree of standardization of abundance to complement in the future for the stock assessment or something.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, thanks, Dewey. I've got a question from Pat Gear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dewey, just real quick, the observer work on snappers, is that being done in the banded reel fishery?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's there's all the gears across there: buoy fishing, banded fishing, hook and line, long lining. So they're focusing on where the pounds are caught at in strategic areas. From I think it's like Key West, Wilmington area, Merle's Inlet area, and there's a little bit off Wanchese, I believe. And so it's all the gear types.
Yeah, thanks. And Pat, I know you spent some time down in the South Atlantics, but I'd just be careful how much information you let everyone know you know about down there, or you'll be sitting down there at Mid-Atlantic, at South Atlantic Council meetings with Dewey.
Well, Philly versus Key West.
But at least you don't have chickens and little alligators running around chasing you all over the place.
That afternoon, all of a sudden, I'm in the hotel room and I hear, like, what the, you know?
All right, so that concludes our South Atlantic report. Let's, under new business and other general public comment, I do have one thing that I'd like to mention. So we started today's meeting with a recognition of our new and reappointed members. I'd like to close today's meeting with another recognition of one of our own. Each year, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission goes through a process for giving, folks that participate with the commission and in fisheries management awards of excellence. And this year, one of our own, Chairman Reed, was given the award for management and policy contributions by the commission at their meeting. I guess that was a couple weeks ago. And, so here's the funny story. As you know, there's always especially with Eric involved. So we're standing there, and some of you were there, but we're standing there. Eric's about 2 or 3 feet away from me, talking to somebody. He's got his little drink with his olives down at the bottom, and he's swishing it around, not expecting much. Jim Gilmore, I guess he's the awards chair, his voice resonates through the crowd. He's not a soft-spoken person, as all of you know, Jim. So he gets up and he, provides a little preface to what these awards are, but the awards they're maintained as secret. No one's really supposed to know. So I'm standing there and I'm listening, and so this is what Jim was saying. For nearly a decade, Eric Reed, first time he said his name, has devoted countless hours to fisheries management process at both the Commission and New England Council, and increasingly at the Mid-Atlantic Council. Currently the chair of the New England Council and longstanding proxy for Rhode Island's legislative commissioner, Mr. Reed, that's 2, has been an advocate for the New England commercial fishing industry, consistently bringing the industry's perspective to actions taken by the commission and councils. Mr. Reed, that's the 3rd one, has been an integral and important the whole time. Eric's just kind of back, kind of chatting with people around, not quite understanding yet that he's receiving this award. So Mr. Reed has been an integral and important voice in numerous high-level actions and discussions, including Northeast Canyons and Seamounts, Marine National Monument, and offshore wind development. So for the 4th time, Mr. Reed, and then all we hear is, "Oh, fudge." Because he not fudge, but he finally got the point that he was receiving this award, has played a positive, impactful role in the fisheries management process as a result of his full engagement in the issues before him and his thoughtful consideration of the resource, as well as the economic impacts of proposed actions on the fishing industry. So with that, Eric, congratulations on receiving that award. You are certainly, that is certainly an award that you have put the time and effort into receiving, and I thought the council should offer you a congratulatory round of applause. And if you have anything you'd like to say, now's the time, Eric.
Well, first I'll say thank you, Mike, but I didn't, the word that I used started with an S, not with an F, just so we're clear, but the joke is I'm on the awards committee, so they had to go behind my back to give me the award, and I guess I can't complain about that, but I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. But it's a very humbling award, and I really do appreciate the recognition. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. You're certainly deserving. Anything else to come before the council under new business or continuing business? Okay, I've got Wes.
Not really, I guess it's kind of new business. Hope to see you all come visit our beaches next or in 2 months. We're looking forward to having everybody. We're going to plan something. Sonny and I are going to have a dinner one night, so we'll figure all that out. Come early, explore our beaches. A lot of breweries around. You can go to Cape Ann Open State Park, see where President Biden fell off his bike. So there's plenty of stuff to see all around. See you then.
Yeah, thanks, Wes. And I also have a property there that I'm trying to figure out a way to maybe have a little hospitality or something one evening on the water. My family has a place there, so I'll work with Wes and Sonny and Chris, and we'll try to get something planned for a nice trip down to the beaches of Delaware. Dewey, did you have something? Saw your hand. No, you're good. Okay, any other continuing or new business? Okay, seeing none, thank you all for your time and dedication to our council process over the course of this week. And I'll look forward to seeing you all in a couple months. This meeting stands adjourned. Thank you. Get home safely.